Good morning. I'm Randy, and that's Jeremiah, and we are at different places. Jeremiah's actually on vacation, so he's carving off a little bit of his life so he can participate in our radio program. And Jeremiah, where are you at in the world?
Up in Port Angeles, Washington. So it's beautiful up
Wow.
here, the Pacific Northwest. And as most people know, Randy and I are both certified financial planners. I'm also a California licensed attorney. And each week we get together to talk about hot topics, difficult items to try and make help you make better choices with your money.
Yeah, so right now, what we want to talk about, there's a lot of pundits, there's a lot of comparisons of what we're going through right now with what happened in the 70s.
Mm.
And I really want to come back and kind of do a comparison and go through that. Now, I was in business. I started in my first job was in the basically 73, 74, and I worked through that. I started my own company in the late 70s. So I have a vivid memory of what inflation was like and the cost of money and real estate and how it affected everything. And so when people talk about and compare with what's going on today with what was going on then, I have to respond and say, yeah, there's similarities, but there's big differences too. So
Okay.
this is
And
not the 70s.
the difference of my personal experience, if I was not alive in the 70s, I was born in the early 80s. So I grew up in the generations or the decades that came after that. But I've read a lot about the 70s, and there's a lot of analysis and drawback to say, okay, this is similar to then. But I think it's also a good moment to, what were you feeling, Randy? In the midst of, like you said, starting a business.
Well, again, I started my business in the late 70s, and a lot of my clients back then were contractors. And like me, they were fairly just starting out. So they were working in the trades in some way. So when interest rates all of a sudden went from 6, 7, 8%, and literally prime went up to like 14%, it drove these people out of business. I mean, it was such a wash that small businesses could not exist, and you were borrowing, to borrow for a house. Your FHA loans were at 14%. Can you imagine? And
Mm.
today, you had a oil embargo, and they had odd even. You couldn't fill up your car unless your license plate matched the odd or even number for that day.
That's such a difference, I think, than what we think of, the price is high at the pump. That's
Right.
frustrating. I think a lot of
Sure.
people feel that painfully, but the idea of that they wouldn't actually let you buy gas. I feel like if we
Right.
did that now, we'd have fistfights at the pumps. And maybe you did then.
Well, no, there was. People would jump line. Of course, people feel like they had a priority. And you read about, I don't remember anybody getting shot, but I'm sure that there was some pretty violent moments where people, they protect their territory, right?
Wow, wow. And so with that, there's gas rationing. There was high interest rates, of upwards of 10%. Employment, you might understand in the 70s is it was a tough time. Is that there wasn't a whole lot of
Yeah,
jobs.
unemployment was over 10%. I mean, it was a tough time.
Yeah. So,
So,
so some key differences, I think, till today is that we have an oil issue, which is interesting. That's uniquely the same oil, right? It's a different issue, but same
right.
concept. We have high inflation, not that high, but high inflation. But the massive difference I see is that our unemployment rate is not to say rock bottom exactly, but it's way down there. Like it's pretty significantly low.
Right. So you can get a job. If somebody is unemployed and they're looking for a job, readily, it may not be the exact job that they want, but there is sufficient number of businesses out there that are hiring, and you can put food on the table and keep a roof over your head. Gasoline, oil prices, yes, they're high. Gasoline prices are high, but we're still energy independent. We're not dependent upon another country to ship us oil and somebody that we are not necessarily agreeing with philosophically or politically. And that's what happened back in the 70s. So that's not happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a key question I see is how did the 70s end? Some people remember this, some don't, but we're in this situation. It was difficult, but how did they end? My understanding is we had to kick the economy in the face, but you may explain it better of how did that end? How did that 70s
Well, from Nixon through his exiting, him resigning from the office, Ford coming in, and Jimmy Carter, there was a political upheaval. So Jimmy Carter was elected over Gerald Ford, but then Jimmy Carter couldn't get it couldn't get under control. And of course, we had this thing with Iran where they invaded the embassy. That was kind of an embarrassment to the United States. and there's some errors in that along. So he was basically the regime change. So Reagan came in 1980, and Paul Volcker was already starting to talk about increasing interest rates. And he hit the brakes. Interest rates shot up dramatically. But the cause and effect it drove inflation down. It broke the back of inflation. And we have not had any significant inflation from 1982 until significantly now. And so we've had this uninterrupted growth within our economy. It's a phenomenal what happened when Volcker hit that. But also you had to couple that with some of the changes that Reagan did politically, and he was able to get through as far as legislation and such as that. So anyway.
Yeah. And so with that, we then go into the 80s of, economy recovered, and it grew through the 80s and all sorts of good things. I mean, today what we see with the Fed, we see the Fed making changes. We see the Fed increasing interest rates. We see the Fed trying to do it differently, I think, than Volcker did. Not doing nothing, back at the Great Depression, but doing something, but not just kicking it, hugely with interest rates, but just kind of easing into it. And a difference I see a lot of people talking about is, the Fed being active, the Fed increasing interest rates with this strong employment may allow this to be a shallow recession. That's the hope. That's the optimistic view, is that we get a shallow recession, if they want to label it a recession, that then continues on. But the detriment could be that we go deeper from here. The hard part I see with the Fed's job is that it's like driving in the snow. If you turn the wheel, it doesn't immediately respond. It takes a second, and if you keep turning it, eventually those wheels are going to bite, and you're going to be out of control. Yeah, so you have to be real careful to turn the wheel a bit and let things catch up. And I think the Fed is having to increase interest rates, but then be mindful to let the economy catch up.
Yeah, you got to remember the Federal Reserve in 1979 had one mandate, and that was to break the back of inflation. Jerome Powell, now the counterpart to Paul Volcker, he's got a dual mandate, and that is to keep inflation under control, but also to keep unemployment low. So he's got a dual mandate. So he's looking at both of those factors when he talks about increasing interest rates. So there's a difference. There's a difference with what his decisions are and what his mandate in front of him is versus what Paul Volcker had. So
we are. Well, if you missed any part of this episode and want to hear more of it, you can find it on our website, retirementunlimited.com, or you can find it on YouTube. Just search for Retirement Unlimited, and you find a bunch of our shows. And if you have a comment or an item you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, you can go to our website and click on the contact button. It's www.retirementunlimited.com. Leave us a note, and we'll make sure we talk about your thoughts on a future episode.